Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. And today, I want to welcome our guest, Jim Laird. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm good. So you're in Nicaragua now, correct?
Yes, I am. Yes.
What are you doing in Nicaragua?
Well, I wanted to live a more simple, more outdoor life. I wanted to do, I owned a gym in Lexington, Kentucky for 20 years and had some health challenges that came with that. And so I really wanted to simplify my life. And here I am.
I want to get back to that because I'm curious how you make the decision of right here.
Sure.
Okay. But I want to ask you a couple questions about lifting weights. So when I was a kid,
Sure.
my mom used to tell me, you know, when you lift weights, it stuns your growth. Don't lift weights. Don't lift them over your head. And is there any truth to that?
You'd have to lift some pretty crazy weights to hurt yourself as a kid, particularly in our generation. You know, we played outside so much. We were so resilient. We could do dumb things. I worry more about this generation because they don't have that resiliency.
Yeah.
So they could definitely injure themselves in the weight room, but there isn't really any scientific background on lifting weights and stunting growth. It's kind of an old wives' tale.
Yeah. So I want to go into a little bit about your personal journey, and then we'll talk about where you are today. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Northern Canada. I grew up in a town, Edmonton, Alberta. I grew up in actually Fort Saskatchewan, which is just outside of Edmonton. I was born in a gold mining town called Red Lake, Ontario, which is in the middle of nowhere. Bonus points if you Google it and look it up. It's literally a mining town in the middle of nowhere. Then moved to Winnipeg, Manitoba, and then ended up in Edmonton. So I grew up in the biggest, most northern city in the world.
So what was your family life like? Were your parents together? Did you have siblings?
They were together. I had I was the oldest, and then a set of twins, and then my brother. We were all really close together. And I won't get into too much detail, but it wasn't the greatest experience. I'll leave it at that.
You mean as far as your childhood and your parents, or
yes,
siblings?
Yes.
Yeah, well,
siblings was fine, but parents was not a good situation.
Between them or reflecting on the kids?
Both,
well?
but between them, in particular, my mother and myself.
Did they stay together?
Yes, yeah, amazingly so. I don't talk to them much, but they kind of live in their own little world. I think a lot of people, when I work with people coaching wise, their family stresses them out a lot. Yeah. And it's a big part of their issues. And just like, you're not obligated if these people are bringing a lot of monkeys and drama into your life. You can set boundaries and say, hey, look, I'd love to talk to you, but if you continue to do X, Y, and Z, I'm just going to create some space. And so I set some clear boundaries with them, and they just couldn't stay within those boundaries. So I prefer not to be in touch.
Yeah, so not to interject my story, but maybe there's something
Please
we can relate to. I came from an abusive household, like physically abusive from my dad, obviously mentally abusive.
Yes.
My mom was sort of in denial about the whole situation. So there's years of not communicating. But then I thought to myself, like, having a kid, grandkids and all that stuff, I thought to myself, like, why am I holding on to this? So the idea for me was to forgive, let go, to stop giving the power over me. And we have a completely different relationship now. It's like the power shifted. So I understand what what you mean about boundaries. I don't know, life is so short, and obviously if they're not bringing anything into your life.
I did the forgiveness, and that was a big part of my health challenges, the anger and resentment I had from my childhood. I used sports particularly violent sports, football, wrestling, the weight room, to manage that stress. And it ended up with me getting an autoimmune disease because I was working too much. You know, a lot of the typical behaviors of people that have suffered trauma, especially at a really young age. And I did that. I figured out finally that I had to forgive some people, and I did that. And I contacted them and said that, and I allowed them back into my life. But they just are so set in their ways that they couldn't change, and they couldn't be anything what they're just comfortable in misery. You know, they love making each other miserable, and that's who they are. And I just don't want to have any part of that. So, you know, people say that I'm crazy and that I'm nuts, but you know, I don't owe them anything. So, you know, I decided that I would distance myself. I stay in contact with two of my siblings. The other one I elect not to, because she's kind of gone down the same path. And sometimes you have to make some tough decisions. And I really try to make sure that people in my life are making my life better and making me a better person. And, you know, getting on the phone and interacting with them just caused me an immense amount of stress.
Yeah, I completely understand. It's I never had an expectation of them to change. It's me who's making the change. So
Sure.
they're still the same. They did a very little changing. Even though my dad did have a conversation with me and said years ago, he said, "Listen, you know, we made mistakes. There was no book written, even though there were lots of books written, but okay, I'll let him go with that."
Sure.
But he's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry if I made it. There's nothing I can do to go back."
Well, yeah, and at least he acknowledged that, right? But when you have people that are demonstrating very dysfunctional behaviors and continuously trying to drag you in, and when they call you or you call them, it's complaining about the other spouse. It's moaning and whining and bitching. And it's not, how are you doing? How's life treating you? It's like, here's all my problems. And, you know, hey, you have the opportunity to walk out at any time, but you're codependent on this other person and you're codependent on this dysfunctionality. So I'm not going to bring that into my life. Like, there's no positive that comes from it other than me just rolling my eyes and getting frustrated. Yeah. So I just said, hey, look, if you can't call me and have a conversation that involves you asking me how I'm doing and you not bringing up all these dysfunctional things that you have control over, and I just hear the same complaints over and over again, if you can't do that, then you're not going to be part of my life. And it's been about 15 years since I talked to him. So.
Yeah, and that makes total sense to me. I think it's, you know, from my perspective, some people, you already mentioned codependency, and I'm glad, you know, recognizing that and removing yourself from that is step one. But I think some people, so two things, there's generational trauma, there's things that can repeat themselves over and over.
Yeah.
So for your parents and their grandparents and so on and so on. And the other thing is, it's all they know. So it gives them a sense of significance. So I am the complainer for that. I get attention. Let me get more complaining. And it's this cycle that, you know, it's unfortunately some people can never break.
Yeah. And part of that, my understanding and part of my forgiveness was understanding that, you know, they were just doing what was done to them and they did the best they could. Right. And so that was part of the forgiveness. But there comes a point where I have to, you know, draw boundaries. And that's essentially what I chose to do. And a lot of people have a really hard time with that. They're like, my brother or my sister. And it's just like, yeah, but if they make your life miserable, like what's the point?
Yeah, especially showing up in a physical, you know, sort of ailment or something, as you mentioned, you know, an autoimmune condition that you may have been already genetically predisposed to, but the stress in your life epigenetically turn that on. So if you're aware of that, you want to mitigate that from happening again.
Sure. Absolutely.
So I want to go back as a kid. You already sort of mentioned this, that you were a kid that was into sports, right? You were an athlete. So you was it wrestling and football, or was there something else?
Wrestling, football, all the sports. In Canada, when it's 40 below, there isn't really anything else to do other than play sports. And, you know, I acted out in school and I was kind of disruptive. I was kind of a smart ass and still am. But, you know, the pastor of my church. And of course, the thing that made it even worse is that, my parents are really involved in the church, which made a lot of hypocrisy looking at it from a child's perspective. Instead of investigating, why is this kid being so disruptive? Why is he acting this way? Hey, this kid is aggressive. He's disruptive. Let's put him in a sport. And then, you play football, you knock the crap out of people, you wrestle, you knock the crap out of people, people clap. Yay, good job. You talk a lot of boxers and things like that. They get into and that's fine. It's a good outlet, but it didn't really get to the root cause of what was really going on. And I used that to get validation that I wasn't getting from home. And I used that to drive me. And it ended up, there comes a time when you can't do that anymore. And after football and wrestling was over, I switched to powerlifting. And that combined with the, driving myself into the ground work-wise as training people, not sleeping enough, not getting, not taking care of myself, working too many hours led to, me getting ulcerative colitis. And I learned that I needed to forgive some people, particularly my parents. And I learned that I needed to, learn how to chill. And so that was a big wake-up call for me. And you're right, we all have these underlying health issues. I'm just glad that mine was like ulcerative colitis and not like a heart attack or a stroke. So everybody has these underlying vulnerabilities, and the environment is what pulls the trigger on the gun, so to speak. So
when you went from sports to powerlifting, I'm assuming you were already lifting as you're training for your sports, football and all that stuff. How did you make a decision and said, you know what, now I'm going to shift over and focus my efforts on, powerlifting and lifting weights?
Well, I love the weight room more than I actually like playing football. And that's what kind of led me into, and I took elementary education in school, and I got halfway through and I was like, this education system's horrible. It's designed to make you a mindless idiot. I don't want to have anything to do with this. I was like, so how can I teach and still, not be in the system? So I became a strength and conditioning coach, and I started interning at the school I was at. And then I ended up going to the University of Arizona and working there. And then I ended up moving to Lexington, Kentucky, where I started working. Powerlifting was just aggressive. It was, I could get in the weight room and I used the weight room. I wanted to be big and strong and tough. I didn't want anybody to be able to mess with me. And so it was a natural kind of way of self-therapy, so to speak. And the problem is I had, the weightlifting and the working too many hours and the not sleeping, and I was using performance enhancing drugs at the time, which allowed me to drive myself way past where I should have. The fact that I wasn't sleeping, I was working too many hours, just really kind of did me in,
When did you make a decision that, you're powerlifting, you're working out, you're getting big and strong, that you said, I'm going to also teach other people to do this? Did somebody come to you and say, hey, at the gym, well, what are you doing? Show me how to do that. And you sort of from there.
It just kind of happened naturally. Like I started interning in the weight room, and then, was at Liberty University, then University of Arizona. And then when I was at Arizona, I was working at a gentleman's establishment, because I was back then interns only got paid I think it was like $2.50 an hour. And we worked like 60 hours a week. And so I had to work at a gentleman's establishment. And that was back when those things were rocking, because they didn't have really, the internet wasn't big yet. And,
are you saying a strip club?
Yes, that's correct. I just was using the
I was a
term.
DJ in a strip club too.
Yeah. So dude, I was a
college,
bouncer. I was a bouncer at the best strip club in Tucson. And of course, we had all the special forces guys coming in. We had all the UFC guys. We had NFL guys. We had, all the pro baseball players coming in. Plus, we had all the drug runners that are coming across the border from Mexico. Right. So there was an ungodly amount. If I'd have saved even 10% of the money I made back then, I'd be set for life. So, I worked once or twice a week, and it paid all my bills beyond that. And, that was, it was crazy. So a couple of the girls were having back issues, and walking around in those big damn shoes all the time. And so they approached me to train them, and all of a sudden they not only did they feel better just by doing some basic lifting, they started looking better too. And then before you know it, I was training like 40 dancers. And you feel like a freaking, you walk into a gym with freaking 40 strippers, and people are like, who's this dude, right? So I ended up, when I moved to Lexington, I started training some women, and it just took off. Like, that was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when women weren't in the weight room. Yeah. I was actually joking with Rob Wolf the other day. I'm good friends with Rob Wolf, the paleo guy, and I actually met him in California, in Chico, before he was the paleo guy. And the first part of my career was empowering. I still train guys too. I trained professional athletes and stuff, but the big part of my early career was empowering women to go in the weight room, because there was no women in the weight room in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now you go in the weight room, and there's nothing but women, even here in Nicaragua. It's crazy. So now I've shifted my focus on, now I'm working on trying to help 40-year-old dudes kind of get their groove back and empowering them. So I've kind of shifted my focus.
Is there a different approach to training women versus men?
Oh, absolutely. Women's more of a mentorship. You can't be, you have to be subtly, you have to be firm, almost like a father. You have to be firm, but you also have to be fluid. And it's more of a relationship mentorship thing. Whereas with men, it's usually like, here's what we need to do. We're going to get it done. Women, it's a little bit different. And they interact, the way they interact together, you really have to be flexible. And some days they're going to come in and they're going to want to do what they need to do. And other days they're not. Some days they just need, like, I'd walk in and I'd be like, it's one of those days we just talk, like, especially working with female sports teams. There's days you walk into that weight room and you're just like, holy, it's like, you could tell they're all their cycles are synced together. And you're just like, we're just going to talk about relationships today. And they'll talk and they'll share. And we might do a little warm up, and then I'll say, hey, the workout today is totally optional, and we'll talk for 10 or 15 minutes, and they'll be like, oh, we feel better. We want to train. And so they train. Men, it's more like, let's get this done. This is what we got to do. It's more direct. It's more straightforward. Today's a little different. Men have changed a little bit, but back then it was like, this is the job. We need to get it done, and here's how we're going to do it. And a lot of times with the men, it's like, that's enough. You can go home now. You've done enough.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about food and the impact of food.
Sure.
Focusing on the results that you want. And I want to see if I can preface this question by, like, we obviously know that you need to take in calories, especially if you're powerlifting, all that stuff. But for different things, like sumo wrestlers taking a shitload of calories, and they're big. Sure. Is that the body that you want? Versus powerlifter versus an MMA fighter. Like, is there a different protocol of what food to eat based on what you want results to be?
For sure, absolutely. But I will say on that, what I've learned, particularly from my second health challenge, which was chronic staph infections, I almost had my leg amputated. Light plays a huge role in our physiology, our biology, and how we respond to food. What people don't realize, if you spend your entire day under fake light, that blue light is spiking your blood sugar all day long, whereas sunlight doesn't do that. Sunlight has different colors, different spectrums. So I think the fact that people become indoor zoo animals is a big reason why we got a lot of sick people here. And you'll notice here that the only obese people here in Nicaragua are the ones that are super wealthy, that are living in air conditioning all the time, that are going to McDonald's, that are living basically an indoor lifestyle. They're driving around in cars that are air conditioned. They're not doing manual labor. The people here that are fit or not obese are working outside in the fields. They're outdoors all day. They have one light bulb in their house. So I think that's a big part of it as well. But the food aspect, that's going to be according to your goals, right? A sumo wrestler needs to be as big as possible. So he's trying to get as many easy digestible carbs into him as possible. That's why they eat massive amounts of rice noodles, right? So, you have to, the biggest challenge with working with women in particular is getting them to get over the starvation mentality, where I'm going to be as skinny as possible. You need to convince them they need to lift weights and that they need to nourish their body and give it enough food. a lot of people get caught up in binge eating where they under eat for long periods of time. And then all of a sudden they eat, 2 pizzas on the weekend or drink a half a bottle of wine, getting them to eat a protein in every meal, making sure they're eating whole foods. They're not eating junk food. That's why keto is so successful, because it basically eliminates junk food. It eliminates the cupcakes and the ice cream and the pizza and all that kind of stuff. That's why it's so successful. But yeah, we can totally manipulate calories and manipulate macronutrients to get what we want. If you're working with a weight class fighter, we got to be really careful about how many calories we're putting in, and make sure we're putting in enough calories so they can recover. Very strategic about when we eat our carbohydrates. If you're working with an offensive lineman who's trying to put on weight, we're trying to get as many calories in them as possible. And a lot of times junk food is part of the equation. So yeah, it can be manipulated with the style of training versus like hypertrophy versus strength training. Strength training, just pure strength training, doesn't really put on a lot of size. Whereas bodybuilding, things like that, will put on more hypertrophy depending on what the goal is.
So does that matter that you're lifting like maximum weight at lower reps versus, whatever weight that's comfortable for you?
Well, you can
maximize reps.
If you're doing strict strength training with lower reps, you're going to gain muscle mass, but you're not going to gain muscle mass like a bodybuilder. And a lot of it depends on how you're built too. Like I'm built like a fire hydrant. I mean, I was jacked and lifting really heavy weights before I ever started taking, anabolics. Yeah. And so a lot of it depends on body type. You can choose things you can do plyometrics, you can do different types of explosive training that don't, the hypertrophy usually comes from the repetitions to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, if you're brand new, you're going to put muscle on just from doing calisthenics. But over time, the strength training, the power training, things like that are not going to put on the massive amounts of tissue that doing a traditional bodybuilding program will do. That's why with most athletes, it's a combination of throws, jumps, sprints, some dabbling in powerlifting, and then some form of bodybuilding to get them to the size that you want them at.
Now, you said that your body itself, like how you're built, can determine how you maximize that. So, for me, I'm 5'8", I weigh somewhere between 175, 180, depending on, I don't know if I can put on more weight. I don't know if I can maximize my frame. Is that one of the reasons why people start looking at performance enhancing drugs or substances, because they've reached
possibly
a certain limit and can't do any more?
Well, you got to look at body type and body structure. Yeah. If you look at like swimmers and golfers and people that are long and more of like a straw, they're going to be better at certain things. Like I'm more of a block or a pyramid or just a straight up cinder block. We're going to be better at lifting weights. I'm going to be better at stacking things on top of me. You look at all the Mr. Olympia type competitors, they have certain muscle bellies, they have certain shapes. There's certain body structures that are better at certain sports than others. Just like cars, like a 4Runner is going to be better at driving off-road. You can still drive it on the highway, but it's going to be way better than driving off-road than a Corvette. The Corvette's going to be good on the track. So you look at the Olympics, most of the sprinters look the same. Most of the swimmers look the same. All the pole vaulters look the same. All the shot putters look the same. So understanding what your body type is and picking the right exercises for your body type, like my body type is going to be really good at deadlifting. It's going to be good at certain activities. Like a tall, long, lanky kind of dude is not going to be really good at doing things like deadlifts, but they're going to be great at rotation and great at throwing.
Yeah.
So that's why you got to be really careful with athletes. If I take a baseball player who needs to rotate and I turn him into a power lifter, it's going to take away from his ability to rotate. Now, if I'm working with an offensive lineman, he doesn't need to worry about rotation. He needs to worry about not getting turned.
Yeah.
So a lot of the traditional things like bench press and that are going to be fine for him. But, if I'm working with a receiver like Randy Moss and I try and turn him into a power lifter, Randy's such a great athlete, it's probably not even going to make that big a difference, but it might take away from some of his ability to turn and rotate and do the things that he's good at.
Yeah, and he's tall and lean and, long, as you said. So, I mean, that's my follow-up question to that is,
Right.
Personalization. I mean, personal, the podcast, everything is personal. I really believe, like, you know, people have their limitations within that, and
Yes.
you personally train them to maximize what they're able to withstand based on their bodies.
Yeah, we want to be the best version of ourselves, right? You know, I'm not going to look like Chris Helmsworth or anyone like that. I just don't have the body structure, but I can be the best version of myself. That happens a lot with women. They're like, I'm going to do Gwyneth Paltrow's workout.
Thank you.
Gwyneth Paltrow is not, you know, an obtainable physique for most women. And quite frankly, most men, me personally, I don't find Gwyneth Paltrow especially attractive at all. You know, I prefer my women to be athletic and curvy. Gwyneth Paltrow is not my number one choice. Sorry, Gwyneth. But, you know, so getting women that are curvy to embrace their curves and getting them to understand that, hey, if you lift weights, you're just going to become a better version of yourself. Those curves are going to get better. You're going to lose some sizes because, you know, muscle and fat weighs the same, but muscle takes up less space than fat. So you're going to shrink down and you're still going to have those wonderful curves. So getting people to understand their body type and making sure their goals are realistic. Like some of the things that some guys have done to become, you know, certain things, you know, that's where the performance enhancing drugs come in. I think the big problem with the performance enhancing drugs is they used to be something that, you know, before Ben Johnson, when you made it to the NFL, they pulled you aside and said, hey, man, there's this stuff you can take that's really going to help you stay healthy, and it's going to give you a little bit of an edge. But those are the only people, the wrestlers, the football players, you know, the high-level Olympians, they're the only ones that mess with it. Since Ben Johnson, and they blew it into this great public scandal, everybody's talking about it. And you got these kids that haven't put in the work, and they haven't. The steroids are so you could train harder, right? And so you can actually overtrain. And so you got these kids that are like 14, 15, 16 that are doing peptides and all these other things, and they can't even do freaking cartwheels, you know? So they haven't put in the time. Like I waited till I was 25 before I did anything, and I think I could bench close to 500. I squatted 600 or 700. I deadlifted like 600 pounds before I touched any performance enhancing drugs. So the performance enhancing drugs are to take you to the next level so you can train harder and recover faster. People today look at it as like a shortcut or a cheat code, and that's where they usually end up in big trouble. Because if you build a foundation on tools, it doesn't really work well. You need a strong foundation. Like look at Ronnie Coleman, great genetics. Like Ronnie Coleman won his first pro show with completely drug free, and he looked like a freak. And then of course, what does he do when he starts taking drugs? He becomes a bigger freak, you know. But he made it. If you can't make it to the high level without drugs, you're probably not going to be able to stay there very long.
Yeah, and then he paid for it.
He's paying for it now. He's paying for the way he trained. He can barely walk. I mean, you know, I watched a clip of him the other day. He could barely shuffle across the room, and he was talking about how his pain is a 12 out of 10. And all these people are like, yeah, dude, that's awesome. And I was just like, man, it's awesome until you're there.
Exactly.
You know, I used to have the same attitude. I used to think that, I used to have this attitude of like, they asked Olympians, like, if we gave you a drug and you would win every gold medal for the next year, but then you die right after that, like something like 80% of them said, give me the pill.
Yeah.
You know, and I used to have that same attitude. And then I, got colitis and sat on the toilet for like 8 hours and shit blood out, and that kind of changed my mind.
Let me ask you a question, Jim. So I'm going to see if I can ask this question. I'm a big proponent of mental health affecting physical health. So
sure.
I'm just wondering what was going on in your life at that time that actually colitis manifested it. Was there extra stress that was happening?
Oh yeah, dude. When I first got colitis, I went and looked at like all the causes of autoimmune disease. Yeah. I'd just been in a car wreck. I had just gotten out of a crazy ass relationship. I was working 12 hours a day. It was around 2008 when it happened. So I just lost half my clients because in Lexington, horse industry, real estate industry, all imploded. Their tax bills came due and they didn't have any money coming in, so they couldn't continue to train with me. So instead of being smart and saying, hey, I'm going to I'm going to be smart. I'm going to cut my budget back. I'm not going to eat out as much. I'm just like, well, I'll just go back to bouncing at the strip club, So on the weekends, I was bouncing at the strip club, making money. And I was dating a girl from Ohio, and she was coming in on the weekends. So there was no sleep happening that weekend every time she'd be there. And then I just kind of had a midlife crisis, and I lived in Aspen for a while. And one of my good friends was in Aspen, and I was like, went kind of nuts. And I drove all the way to Aspen, got there. I was like, no, I don't even want to be here. I want to be in Lexington, drove all the way back. So, dude, I was a hot mess. And so when I got colitis, I looked down the whole list of things. It was car accident, stress, relationship. I checked off every box that could possibly be checked off. So, not to mention when you're on a lot of performance enhancing drugs, you don't necessarily sleep well. You're fairly irritable. And so, I checked them all off. So it became like a several year journey, learning how to shut off and relax and float tank and acupuncture and all, changing my diet and all sorts of major changes that really helped me become a better coach and trainer, because then I implemented a lot of these things. A lot of the women I worked with were highly stressed. They were working too much, 2 jobs and 3 kids, and, teaching them how to relax and chill, going to the gym every day and still gaining weight. So teaching people that I trained that, like Paul Chek taught me, in order to work out, first you have to work in, right? And I was doing the workout part, and I thought a day off from the gym was rest. But, if you're not sleeping and you're spinning around in your head and you're working a 12-hour day, that isn't really necessarily a rest day.
Yeah. And I was going to actually ask you how you approach rest and recovery. And is that part of the training? Because I mean,
for sure.
As you see, like, my daughter goes to Berkeley. So I was just there for Parents Weekend, and, there's some guys they're really into their sport. Like, this is all they do, and they train, and then they go out. And I saw them going out and partying. And in the morning, they're at a frat, they're drinking beer. It's just, it's going to, I know they're young now.
Some people can get away with it. Like Michael Jordan got away with it. He never slept, Dennis Rodman. There's those outliers and those freaks, but most people can't. I used to have a sign at the gym in Lexington that said, the real work begins now when you actually leave the gym. And I used to have a sign on my wall that said, rest more. And, getting people, I think my friend Joel Jameson, 8 weeks out, he has an app called Morpheus. He said, it's just as important to teach people how to switch it on. It's even more important to teach people how to switch it off when they're done. So especially in our modern life, like I compare a modern life to getting in your car in the driveway, starting it up and revving the living shit out of it while it's in park all day and never driving anywhere. And that's essentially our modern life. Our modern life has pulled us indoors. We become zoo animals. We have constant chronic stress with the phones, and with, we don't have to do any manual labor. I think manual labor is one of the healthiest things you can do, like low level activity all day. We don't move around. We sit around, we watch TV, we watch Netflix, we order from Uber Eats. So getting out in nature is a big part of the being, calm, and the big part of the restorative part of things. And most people don't do that. So yeah, like teaching people how to chill, how to relax is super duper duper important. It's just as important as hard training, if not more important.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm glad you said that. I want to talk to you about supplementation. What are your thoughts on supplements as people are working out? Because you mentioned like peptides and things of that nature. Is it important to have a regimen of supplements? When I'm not even talking about, performance enhancing, just supplements.
Yeah. I think people go to the supplements too quickly. They have something called therapeutic runway, where they work for 8 to 10 weeks and then they don't work. Chronometer is this app that you can put your food into and see basically what micronutrients you're missing, and essentially helps you determine what you're deficient in. And I think there's some things that people do well with, like ZMA every night before bed, magnesium, zinc, and B6. I think creatine is a pretty wise thing to take, but most people are not eating enough for enough of the right things, and they're not sleeping, and they're going for the creatine, they're going for the energy drinks, they're doing all these fancy things. They're building their foundation on tools instead of building our 5 fundamental habits are get outside 3 times a day, walk after meals, get that sunshine, get your circadian rhythm in order, eat a protein at every meal, get the lights off at night, so you can actually sleep, drink high quality water, preferably spring water, and have a good social connection. Most people, those things are an absolute shit show, particularly the circadian rhythm aspect of it. And then they're looking for ashwagandha or whatever else to solve those problems. And HRT falls into that too. I have no energy. I can't get out of bed in the morning. Instead of looking at the foundation and like, okay, am I getting my sleep? Am I getting the lights off at night? Am I getting enough protein? They just go right to the TRT and they feel better for a while. And then all of a sudden, all those habits that got them to use the TRT in the first place, the TRT quits working. They got to up their dose or they got to take more thyroid. I see a lot of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you're reading my mind, because I was going to ask you, because you work with people now also that are 40 plus. So I'm in the 50 plus column. And
I'm right there behind you. I turned 50 this year.
Yeah. So I'm 52. And it's interesting because now the conversation is about, well, your testosterone level. So I took my test. My doctor said, you're okay for now, but it's starting to get lower. As it gets lower than 300, you may want to start looking at, hormone optimization, HRT, that you were talking about, and TRT. So I'm just wondering, is there a way to be able to avoid that? Because we didn't have to do that for many years. And maybe it's a lot of the things that you said, because we don't work outside and all those things. But can we motivate ourselves to, develop our own, hormones?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, getting out the sun, I think, is the biggest part of it. There's a lot of people that argue you don't want to take anything that your body produces, but at the same time, a man your age going into 50, even 50 years ago, would have had 1,000 testosterone. Yeah. And so now you're going into your elder years with, close to 300, which isn't terrible. Some people don't need.
No. I'm over 300. I'm like 360 something. So
yeah, but you're still you're in the mid 300s.
Yeah.
Normally, at a 50-year-old man, even 50 years ago, would be 800, 900.
Right.
So they would have a much bigger, runway to descend from. Mm-hmm. With the plastics and with, a lot of the endocrine disruptors and things like that, and us living an indoor lifestyle, that's where it's like, okay, what do you want your exit to look like? So at 50, if you're at 360 or 400, you don't have quite as much wiggle room, because then it becomes a personal decision. Like, okay, I'm going to take a little something. You're not going to take super physiological levels, but you're going to do everything you can, optimize stress management, do your sleep and all that to get your testosterone naturally up as high as possible. But a lot of people will say, hey, I'd rather feel better and have a much easier descent than, all of a sudden the wheels drop off the plane, right? So that's an individual decision, a personal decision. A lot of it depends on symptoms. Are you depressed? Are you having a hard time functioning? Is hard work you have no motivation for hard work? Because I've seen plenty of people. A lot of it is what's your free testosterone. Yeah. The total T is relevant, but the free testosterone is the most important. Obviously, I'm not a medical doctor. This is just me from my own experience of working with clients and working with Dr. Stillman for the last 2 years in a medical practice and a coaching program that I help install there. But a lot of it depends on the person. Some people do great with 400 levels. Some people can have 1,000 and still feel like garbage. It just depends a lot on, some people use hormones really well and some people need a bunch extra. So everybody's a little bit different.
Yeah, it's a personalized approach to, and like you said, it all depends also what do you want to achieve. Like
right.
if your goal is, I don't know how many people's goals in their 50s is to, become Mr. Olympia or whatever it is, or be a professional athlete versus functioning, quote unquote, normally in your.
I look at The Rock, like, he's made his whole brand around the way he looks, and he pretty much has to take stuff to look like that, right?
Oh yeah.
Sorry to spoil it for you guys. You guys think The Rock is natural, but just like the Liver King. If a dude's over like 230 and he's shredded, He's not natural. Like that's just not that's just not happening.
Yeah,
And there's a few exceptions in the NFL, but like particularly if you're over the age of 50, you don't look like The Rock without some help, you know.
for sure. Where do you see the future of sort of fitness and wellness heading? Like I have a genetics company. We do genetic testing and analysis and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So we focus on precision wellness and health. There's so much technology that's being utilized right now. Is it going to start kind of shifting away from?
Do you want to know? Do you want to know where I think it's going, where I want it to go, or where I think it's going to go?
Let's do both. Let's say where is it heading, and then where do you want it to head?
I think the way it's heading is things like Ozempic and the peptides or the GLPs. Like
GLP-1.
They've created the problem by artificial light, by getting people disrupted sleep. The foods are designed to make you eat more of them. They've created this massive cesspool of food addiction and chronic obsessive compulsive addictive behaviors. They've turned people into complacent, compliant consumers. And now they have the cure, right? Now we have the cure. We have these GLP-1 agonists. They're basically going to shut your appetite off, and then that's the cure. They're talking about putting children on it now. So they're going to do all these things to intervene with drugs instead of changing the environment, which made people sick. I think the true solution would be getting people to get outside more, changing the lighting on the screens, adding more red light to the computer screen, adding more red lights to the phones, finding a way to have a different type of system where we're not blasting people with Wi-Fi all the time. Getting the hormone disruptors out of the plastics, going to steel and glass bottles, going back to traditional learning where children are learning play-based, getting back to real farmers like that are actually putting manure on their fields and rotating their animals and rotating their crops and they're raising healthy pigs and chickens and cows. That's the way I think it needs to go. The way it's going to go is the way the pharmaceutical and the medical industry, because that's the two biggest industries. We've got the biggest industries in the United States right now are constant war, the military industrial complex. Sorry if we get you banned off everything, but the military industrial complex and the pharmaceutical and the food industry are the biggest money makers, and they've created the perfect storm to make people obese, and they're going to offer a solution in the form of drugs. They're not going to offer a solution in the form of giving people actually what they actually need to get healthier.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because the sick care system is a subscription model that is there on a rotating basis. I mean, there's no, they talk about obesity, and I wanted to ask you because you work with women, or you have worked with women in the past. There's always a shortcut. Like how can I lose weight? How can I look good in this dress and all that stuff? And I think there's studies coming out now through DEXA scans, which are looking at your bone density, your real ratio to fat muscle, that people who are taking the GLP-1 agonist, Ozempic is one of them, they're losing weight, but what they're losing is also muscle mass, bone density and stuff. So you have this Ozempic phase is starting. So I'm sure they're going to come up with a pill for that too. But
Ozempic, the GLPs, Retroglutathione, whatever they are, I can't remember all the names. But
semaglutide.
There's semaglutide. There's a bunch of tides, right? And I can't remember them all. But the people that have had success with them microdose them. They take them in very small doses that just take the edge off enough so that you don't like overeat and you don't have a lot of problems. Nobody wants to go and do the hard work of the habit changes. The problem the GLPs are so bad is the misuse of them. They give people a big bolus, which shuts their appetite down completely. So they don't eat, they don't lift weights. And so they literally can't. I've heard people can't eat for days when they take a big dose of it. They just have no appetite whatsoever. And then they end up losing bone mass and muscle mass. They don't train, they don't eat, they just keep eating the same foods. So they're under eating protein already. And And so, but the people that have had success with it, they lift weights, they optimize their hormones, they change their lifestyle, and then they use microdosing of it. And microdosing of it has been effective in changing people's ability to like drink less alcohol. So it does help, but they also are building the foundation of the habits as well. So they're not just getting on the semaglutide and expecting to lose a bunch of weight. And women will do that. They'll lose a ton of weight by starving themselves, but then they end up a skinny fat, which is way worse. Like, they end up destroying their metabolism and all the rest of it. So people want the easy way, and
Always.
habit building is the key. Like, it's all about habits. And sometimes you have to go do some deep emotional work, because a lot of the habits you've acquired over the years are coping mechanisms for some of the traumas that you've gone through.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And you said something. You work with a doctor. Is it Dr. Sullivan?
Stillman.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Dr. Stillman. So one of the things you brought up is this notion of, a little bit is sort of this catalyst, but it's not just take this as a shortcut. It's take this with with the following things. Modify what you eat. So stop eating this stuff, even though your appetite may be suppressed. Don't eat your banana bread once a day kind of thing. Because, so start eating, start exercising, start developing those habits, and use this as a little bit of a catalyst.
Well, like metformin is a really good example of this. Metformin is probably the most studied drug on earth, and some people use it as an anti-aging mechanism. Where diabetics get in trouble with metformin is they start taking it and it makes their numbers better, but they don't change their lifestyle, they don't change their diet.
Exactly.
They still live like an ashtray, and then they have to keep taking more and more metformin, and just about anything at a certain dose ends up being a problem. So if they would have just changed their lifestyle, the metformin actually is a net positive over the time for most people. It's been shown to be a great anti-aging drug for some people, but they don't change the lifestyle. They don't fix their sleep. They're still up, 2:00 in the morning watching Netflix or, scrolling through Instagram. So there has to be habit change combined, and you can use tools to help speed you along the way, but there has to be a foundational thing. And most people are reaching for the supplements, or they're reaching for the quick, easy fix. And, that's what marketing is all about, to sell people these things that are going to solve their problems with no effort,
But I do think it's really important what you said, just to emphasize again, and going back to the mental and physical health, people have things that are trauma or stressors in their life, and those are motivating some of their behavior. So unless you get rid of or address the root cause of those, even if you're taking something that's going to accelerate, it's not going to be a long lasting thing. It's trying to change your entire life, like your habits of life. I've done so many different things in my life to try to improve my health and wellness. And some things stick, some things don't. But I used to do it in a group, and we make a decision. All right, we're giving up meat. And when I make a decision, I stick to this. And the other, 9 out of 10 people in the group were like, after a few weeks, they're back. Same thing with sugar. Make a decision, you make a decision and you stick to it. And I really believe it's about this stick and carrot kind of thing. The stick never worked for me. It didn't work for me with my dad. It doesn't work for me. I'm a carrot person. So I have to think about a way of how to give myself a carrot for doing that. So at the end of the day, like you were talking about sitting. So my job, fortunately, or whatever it is, I do a lot of sitting. I try to get up, I try to do pull-ups, but I sit in front of the computer a lot doing this kind of thing, Zoom calls. Yeah. But what I do to reward myself is I go on a hike. So after we're done, I'm going to go on a hike and I'm going to take my dog. And this is my reward for me. That's what I connected to because that's my flow state. So how do we find that thing, that carrot for a person that will actually cause them not to only change their habits, because people do that with their New Year's resolution, but also sustain that habit because there is a prize at the end of that tunnel.
Well, what we do is what I do anyways, is I give people something they can actually handle. Like, let's go for a 10-minute walk after every meal, and we're going to do that for 2 or 3 weeks before we add anything else. And then all of a sudden they start sleeping better. All of a sudden they start feeling better. A walk after for 10 minutes after a meal lowers blood sugar at the same rate as metformin does. It helps with digestion. So all these things help that person feel better. And then it just becomes part of who they are. This is something you do, like brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
So I'm very strategic about adding things into people's lives and not just taking things away. And then we move on to the next habit. And I started walking outside 10 minutes after every meal. I feel much better. I've lost a few pounds. Haven't even changed what I've eaten. Now I'm going to just add a protein. I'm not going to take anything away. I'm just going to add a protein at every meal. They do that for a few weeks. The two habits combined get them a little more along the path. And we just keep adding habits. And then once we get to a certain point, we start looking at some other things as well. But I really try and keep things as simple as possible at first and give people things that they can actually do. I try not to take things away at first, unless I've got a dude who's really sick and like he's drinking 6 or 8 beers before bed. It's like, dude, you've got diabetes, you've got, gout, and, here's a 45 caliber gun, just blow your head off. You might as well just make it fast instead of like killing yourself slowly with 8 beers before bed when you have gout and diabetes.
Yeah, but how do you have that conversation? I don't mean to interrupt, but because I have somebody in my life that I know that is in denial. So first of all, they're overweight. They eat a lot of fast food. Drink a lot of the things they do, but they go, I did a few mile walk with my dog. So that's it. I feel
if they're
good.
coming to me with a problem and they're my friend, I'm going to tell them the truth.
Yeah.
That's how I do it. I'm just like, dude, look, you're not going to make any changes while you're doing X, Y, and Z. And then if they get all pissy about it, then I just never talk to them about it again. I'm not like a Karen. I don't go and try and make people change. If they're coming to me for professional help, the best thing you can be as a coach is honest, right? And tell them the truth and don't blow sunshine up their ass. And then I meet them where they are. And usually I only work with people who are truly ready to change. Like they've gone 4 or 5 different places and they haven't gotten the results. Like a lot of the women that I worked with, they were running marathons and they were gaining weight. They were training twice a day and they're gaining weight. They finally came to me because they needed help and they actually would listen. I always tell that to people, like, don't offer your advice unless somebody comes to you, particularly with family members. You might say, hey, here's this really cool book or this cool podcast that you might want to listen to it and see what happens. When people truly come to you for help, then you can give your advice. But that's generally how I do it. But if I have a true friend, somebody I really care about, I'm going to be honest with them. And if they can't handle it, then they probably don't need to be my friend because they know I care about them. And when you care about somebody, you tell them the truth. If they're walking towards a buzzsaw, like, hey, dude, like there's a buzzsaw right in front of you, right? So that's kind of how I handle that stuff. And I always tell people with spouses and with kids, like, lead by example. Don't be that person that's like, oh my God, don't be that nag. I try to lead by example. People are like, wow, like you're really fit. Like, what do you do? Then I ask, I give them the answer. So whenever I have friends that are in really bad shape or I see people that are in bad shape, I just try to lead by example. I always eat, like right now, like I make up for the fact that I have to spend time in front of a screen by having my office out here in the rainforest. And in between every call, I go for a little walk in the rainforest with my dogs. I get up, I move around. So I do some non-sleep deep rest, breathe through my nose in between sessions, just talking all the time, just kind of spins your nervous system up. So that's what I've kind of done to mitigate things. I lead by example. Like when I was in Lexington, I'd be the only person eating outside and everyone else would be inside. And they'd be like, why are you eating out here? I'm like, well, the sun's really important. It controls your blood sugar, circadian rhythms, vitamin D. It runs your immune system. And they'd be like, oh, that's really weird. I never really thought of that. And they're like, come back 2 weeks later and they're like, hey, I started getting outside in the mornings. My sleep has gotten way better. I feel so much better. Thank you for that. And then the next time I see them, they ask another question. And so it's always better to lead by example than it is to be that annoying Karen,
I agree. I was going to ask you, I forgot. So how did you end up in Nicaragua as your current destination?
Well, so I in the mid 2000 teens, I ended up going, I was dating a lady who really wasn't really impressed with my feet. And she was not happy with my feet because you're a strength coach, you're inside all day, you're sweating and your feet are gross. And so she basically manipulated me into getting a pedicure. So I went and got my one and only pedicure. And after 4 or 5 days after the pedicure, I was in the emergency room. They were prepping to amputate my leg. I got a staph infection from it. So luckily I was able to get that under control and with antibiotics and such, but they told me it would come back again later, but it would just be no leg symptoms. It would just be it'd be like having the flu, but no respiratory symptoms. And sure enough, it came back and it kept coming back and it kept coming back and it kept coming back. And the antibiotics just weren't working anymore. And I was speaking at a Paleo FX, which is like a paleo conference. And I met a guy named Dr. Jack Cruz, who's a neurosurgeon who's fairly controversial. And he said some things that really pissed some people off. And I'm like, I need to become friends with this guy. Like, so I did. And we started talking. I was a member of his group and I did basically a consult with him. And he's like, all right, dude, so you're having reoccurring septic infections, staph infections. Like, so what do you do for a living? I'm like, well, I'm a strength coach. He's like, when's the last time you've seen the sun? And I was like, I get up at 5 a.m. I work till 8 or 9 at night. And he's like, dude, like, you're a zoo animal and the sun runs your immune system and your vitamin D levels and all these things. Like, you need to get your skin in the game. You need to get outside. And so I immediately canceled all my morning sessions. Really pissed a lot of my clients off. So I only worked from like 10 to 4. And then I kept the doors open in the gym. I changed some of the lighting in my gym. And ever since I took his advice, I've had a few minor hiccups, but I haven't had a major staph infection where I required like massive IV antibiotics since. And I was having multiple infections a year. And so once I realized, like, what am I doing? I'm like having people that have been inside all day and then I'm bringing them inside the gym again. I want to live a more outdoor life. So I started making moves to basically live a more outdoor life. And then when COVID hit, they shut my gym down. I was just like, and they started talking about in Kentucky that if you didn't take the application, you weren't going to be able to work with people in person. And so I was like, they're talking about this, I'm out. So I moved to Florida. I had met Dr. Stillman at actually one of Dr. Cruz's events. So we had stayed in touch and we had started doing some work together, collaborating on some courses and some things. And I moved to Florida and I was looking to open an outdoor gym down there. And I started working at a place and then I was in a major car wreck. I had been looking at Nicaragua for a while because I thought it would be a great place to open a gym because it's affordable. It's, it's a place where you can buy, property for dirt cheap. And I've been looking at it for a while because it's a simple life and it's closer to the equator. And so I moved to Florida. Then I was in a major car wreck. I was rear-ended and I lost the ability to speak for a couple of weeks. I was having problems walking and talking. And so I got myself in a better place. And then I moved in with Dr. Stillman in Tampa so I could get EMDR and neurofeedback and float tank and things like that to recover from my brain injury. And we basically started working together and I've helped basically bring group coaching into his medical practice because he didn't, he would meet with people, but he didn't have the follow-up and the habit change and the lifestyle stuff. And so we've incorporated that into medical practice with great success. And so I had basically found and determined to simplify my life, have less expenses, and then open a outdoor gym. And so last year, it'll be December of last year, I packed everything up and took my dog and got in a vehicle, bought an old Pathfinder that would blend in and going through Mexico in particular. And I drove down here and been here ever since.
Pretty cool. I love that. All right. So I have a few questions that I ask my guests, most on music related. So
yeah,
I'm going to switch
sure
a little bit. Do you remember,
please?
And if so, what was the very first concert that you ever attended?
Oh, my family was ultra religious. So, the first movie I attended was E.T. And then my dad took me to Top Gun, which my mom got pissed because of the love scene with Tom Cruise. Concert? Other than the damn church concerts, that's a really good question. I listened to a lot of the music my parents listened to, which is like the Beach Boys, the Ventures, all that sort of thing. I'd say the first real concerts I went to were ones I was bouncing at. I think it was like Leonard Skinner and 38 Special.
Yeah.
I think that was a big one. Yeah, I worked on the road for Metallica for a little while, so that was kind of fun. That was an interesting job, throwing people back over the fence.
Sure.
So, and then you get the signal from the band if it's a hot chick that runs up on stage, you're like, let them go, and it's like, you know, if not, you're, you know, go ahead and spear them and crush them, you know. So, but I don't really remember going to that many concerts at all growing up because my parents just didn't really condone that. So,
what was the last concert you attended, if you remember that?
I went to, it was in Nashville. I was at the Ryman, and it was what's the name? Whiskey Myers. And there was another band, Hey Jude or something like that, opening up for them. And I'd went to Korn before that. One of my friends is good friends with Jonathan Davis and got us backstage and all that. So that was a lot of fun.
Super.
And one of the coolest concerts I've ever been to was I went to Robert Plant and Alison Krauss when they were in Lexington. Then I also went to Gordon Lightfoot in Edmonton when I was in college. I'd just come home. I'd come home when I was in college. It was the last time I probably saw my parents, and he was performing. And you know, like I have such weird musical tastes. Like Edmund Fitzgerald's one of my favorite songs.
Well, I mean, we're gonna get into that. That's the next question. The next question is actually for the next year. You can only listen to 5 albums, but you don't have to remember the name of the actual album. Just what it can be, you know, a Robert Plant, whatever.
There'd be Led Zeppelin's greatest hits.
Yeah.
Johnny Cash, his Folsom Prison album. That's a crazy question because I have such crazy musical. Master of Puppets by Metallica. That's 3. Let me think. The Last of the Mohicans soundtrack.
Okay.
And I gotta have one more workout one. Can't pick another Metallica album. Let me think.
Of course you
Let
can.
me think. No, I can't. I can't do that. That's not right. Master of Puppets is fine. I don't need the Black Album, even though the Justice for All was a great album too. Let me think. I gotta have one more kind of harder rock album. I don't know. Just
Korn.
I've got pretty much. I don't know. I can't. Okay, Motorhead, the one with Orgasmatron on it.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. So, last question. Please describe what your room looked like growing up.
Oh gosh. Oh, it was a disaster. Lots of just chaos, just utter chaos. It was a very simple bed, lots of models on the ceiling, lots of drawings on the wall. It was a mess. My parents were very sloppy and messy, but they would scream at us for our room being messy. So it was very disorganized, very cluttered, just like me and my life. There was they call them sunshine girls. It was like, you know, the page 2 of the British newspaper has the girl in the bikini or whatever on the second page.
Yeah.
They had that in the Edmonton Sun. So I had those like cut out in my closet in the inside of the door. So my mom wouldn't see them. It was one of the doors that folded. So it was great because I could tape it on the back side of the door and she'd open the door and she wouldn't see them. So that was my room.
No posters in the walls?
Yeah, maybe. I think I had a poster of Tom Rathman, who was my favorite football player. He played for the San Francisco 49ers. He was a fullback. Yeah. He you know, and maybe I had one of Dale Howardchuk.
Okay.
I try not to remember too many things from my childhood.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was figuring maybe you have some hockey players.
Yeah. I played a lot of street hockey. I never really played organized hockey a lot because it was so expensive, but I think I had a couple Edmonton Eskimo. I think I might have had one of Damian Allen. Maybe Willie Pless. I think Willie Pless, I went to one of his camps. So he was a linebacker who played for North Carolina.
Yeah.
He had signed a poster for me. I think that was on there as well. But
cool. Jim, where can people engage with you, find out more about you, what you do, coaching and everything else?
Yeah, sure. You can go to vitalitybrotherhood.com. I typically work with men over the age of 40, but I do work with other people as well. That website I have a free group, a men's group, that you can join. There's about 50 guys in it right now. I just started it, so that's on school. There's a button at the top with coaching. I'm actually going to be I'm going to be taking 10 guys in January and basically like 12 or 16 weeks complete, like redesign of your life. Like you're in a bad place, you gained weight, you're overwhelmed, you're in a bad place. We're going to redesign everything from the ground up. Take 10 guys through that. They'll have group coaching calls. They'll have access to me by Telegram or by WhatsApp every day for check-ins and stuff. So I'm going to be doing that in January. So if you want more information on that, or if you want more information on coaching, just go to the coaching button on my website and book a complimentary call with me, and we'll talk about how I can help.
Very cool. And for my audience, thank you so much for listening.
Yeah.
Yes, you enjoyed the show by sticking in, and I really appreciate the reviews. 5 stars are being fantastic. Got some new reviews this week. Even if it's not 5 stars, I say, keep them coming. I'll work on improving.
Any press is good press, right?
It's all good. Keep them coming.
Yeah.
It's all learning experiences, and thank you for buying the book, etc. So, Jim, I really want to thank you. This has been enlightening conversations. I hope people really tune in and listen, because it's really important that there's no quick fix for anything. It's really creating real life changes, and so I appreciate that.
I'll take my last one will be the Guns N' Roses album. That's perfect. The one that's Appetite for Destruction.
Appetite for Destruction.
Paradise City. I'll take
Down
that.
there.
Yeah, Paradise City. Mr. Brownstone.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Jungle. Sweet Child of Mine. I'll take that album too. So I think between those albums, I'm doing pretty good.
All good, man. Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for being on.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching and listening. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, share this episode, and hit that bell. Like, comment. I so appreciate that. And check me out on social under Len May or Len May DNA. Find out more on LinkedIn or lenmaycoaching.com. And remember, everything is personal.